The purpose of this video is just to walk through the inBrain SDK product, getting that set up, and I just want to walk through the documentation, just clarify a few points, and make things real easy during the implementation process. First things first, you'll want to have access to the publisher dashboard. If you don't already, you can head over to publisher.inbrain.ai, click sign up, create an account, and you can log in, and then you'll have access to the dashboard as we see here on my screen. The first step to getting started is just quickly add a new app. You'll want to select SDK Integration for the purposes of this video. Then select Android or iOS app. Behind the scenes, they're the same. It's mainly for labeling purposes here in your dashboard. So we'll go with Android app, give it a name. I'm just going to say Android app for now, and head over to app settings. First thing that is required is adding an in-app currency name. So if you have a currency economy such as points or coins, that's what you would put here. So we'll say for our demo, points and 100 points that we want to give our users for every $1 in revenue that they earn through survey completions. I do want to mention regarding currency such as dollars, if you do want to display actual US currency, and instead of doing something like dollars and then putting in like $0.54 for 54 cents, you're actually going to want to use cents instead. The reason is because we don't support fractional values here, so you'd want to say 54 cents for every $1 instead of adding dollars as your currency name. So sorry if that's a little confusing, but just want to mention that. You'll click save here, and actually before I do that, let me go back to points because that's what I originally said we were going to do for this demo. So 100 points to my users for every $1 they earn in revenue through survey completions. And that revenue is paid to you as the app owner. Here, retention rewards, this is how many points, in our case points, how many points you want to give to your user for completing the profiler survey. So just for clarification purposes, the profiler survey is within the inBrain experience. If it's a brand new user to the inBrain experience, we'll send them through this really short profiler that asks them some basic questions and helps us match that user to surveys. So it's really good if you can incentivize your users to jump into the inBrain experience by saying, hey, complete this short survey and get this many points. So you might put something like 10 points. We often recommend 10% to 15% of your currency ratio. So 10% would be 10 in this case. 10% of 100 is 10. So we'll say 10 points is what we'll give our users if they complete the profiler survey within the inBrain experience. So we'll click save there, and we've saved our publisher currency. This is an area where you can customize the inBrain experience in the colors there. We have a primary color and a secondary color. So you can see as you change the colors here. And we're just going to find something nice and different. Then again, not an artist. So I digress here in the video. We'll just leave it at that for now. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna refresh. I'm gonna leave it default because my colors just weren't working out there. But you can change the colors to match your app. So as the user moves from your app into the inBrain experience, everything is really seamless. So that's everything on this page. The next thing you have to do is go over to SDK Credentials. So here we are. This is your client ID. You'll want to note that down. So I'm gonna drop that in Notepad for myself. And you'll need to generate your secret key. Click this and copy it out. That's really important to go ahead and copy this. Try to make that apparent up here in the messaging. We only show secret keys once, so copy this out in a safe place. Worst case scenario, if you lose it during development process, you could just delete this app, create a new one, get a new client ID and client secret. So I've copied this out, and now I have my client ID and secret key. The next thing you want to do is set up your server callbacks. If you don't already have some server callbacks, after looking through our documentation, you can use webhook.site. This is just a free and simple way to get some testing callbacks. Just go to webhook.site and it generates you a callback URL right here. Just copy that, drop them in, and click save. You'll get a shared secret key. Note that down because that is important to validate the hash signature that is on the callbacks that we send, just to verify that they actually are coming from inBrain. So I'll note my shared key in Notepad. And then you can actually, so once we've saved these, you can actually test these out if you want to test the survey completion. And basically, the postbacks, the purpose of those is that when a user completes a survey or fails to complete a survey, we will send your server via these URLs information about that particular event. So we'll demonstrate a survey completion event. Click test postback. Callback succeeded, and if you go over here to webhook.site, you'll see that we sent some demo info. And this is the info that is sent to your server, and you can parse this out. You'll see here is the reward for the user, so 65 points, and revenue amount 65 cents in US dollars for your app. Is test true? So when your app is not live, test mode is set to true. When it is live, this is set to false, so that you can kind of put some safeguards in place to make sure that you're not processing rewards for real users if your app is not live yet. There is more documentation over here on our documentation site regarding the server-to-server callbacks. I'll quickly point you to that here in the documentation. If you go to SDK Integrations, we do list all the integrations for iOS, Android, and so on. But if you come down to callback configuration, you can click on S2S server-to-server callbacks, and we specify the details about what's in these callbacks, and we go into pretty good detail explaining the purpose of each one. So you can read through that documentation there and be able to interpret those callbacks when our system sends them to your servers. All right, next thing is to set up a test user. So you'll go add test user, add yourself a label such as my test user, and then right here, test user 00234, just for testing purposes. This is the value that you will pass during testing. Set to user, test mode checked, and save that. So I'm going to note this value right here in Notepad because we're going to need that. All right, everything is pretty much set up for some demo testing. Before you do go live with your users, you will want to click go live. Once you do go live, your test users will still see the demo surveys and that demo survey flow. So you'll be able to continue to test with your test users even though you've released your app to be live to your real users. So the next thing we're going to do is jump over to a little bit more documentation. Since we're going through Android, we'll click over on the Android documentation. iOS, React, and Unity is very similar, just a little bit more flavor based on the actual language that you're using for React Native, Unity, and iOS. In Android, obviously, we're using Java. So we're going to run down through a few things here. Integration is easiest with Gradle dependency. That's here in the documentation, so you can set it up and use the inBrain SDK in your project. There's just a couple things you got to do to get started. One is call inBrain.getInstance, set inBrain. I want to point this out because this is where you're going to pass in that client ID. So let me point us back over here. Here's the client ID, right? And you'll pass in your secret. And this was the secret that we got right here, the secret key. And you can ignore is S2S, ignore that for now. This is something that came from our legacy integrations, and so you can just pass true by default. It's actually passed, let's see, let me read the documentation so I'm not misspeaking here. By default, you should pass true for is S2S. Okay, so pass true for that. And then you want to pass in your unique user ID. For testing purposes, we'll pass in that user ID that we set up right here in test users. So this right there. Once you've done that, you can set up a callback to subscribe to events. There's a link here that demonstrates and details all about callbacks and how to receive those. So this is not required, but it's something that you can set up. Get more details about that there. You can also customize the UI, so read through that. You can customize pretty much everything regarding the toolbar that's outside of what we can control within the inBrain experience. So that's discussed in detail here at this link down at the bottom. Now there's two different ways you can implement the SDK. You can implement our survey wall, or you can implement native surveys. I want to run through the differences between the two and explain those. So the survey wall, that's simply opening up the inBrain experience with our offer wall. It will display a list of surveys that we retrieved based on our yield management system for that particular user. But it's basically just a survey wall, as the description describes. It's a wall of surveys that the user can select from. Native surveys is a little bit different. It acts a little bit more like an API. So you would basically say, after you've initialized everything right here, so we initialize it there, and then we would call get native surveys. Okay, this is going to actually return a list of surveys. So instead of displaying them in the survey wall, we return those to you as a list of objects. And then you can actually use that list of objects to display the surveys in your UI of your app. Each survey will have an ID. And when you want to open up one of those surveys, let me just go on down. Right here, show native surveys. Sorry, I scrolled on by it. So you'll basically fetch the surveys, and then there will be an ID associated with each survey. And then you'll call when the user clicks on one of those surveys, you'll actually call show native survey with, and you'll pass that ID in here. Placement IDs is an advanced feature that we have to basically filter for different types of surveys, and we have a video dedicated to that. So see that video in regards to placement IDs. But for now, we're just not going to pass anything in here for placement ID. But basically, once you pass that in, it will load up that survey in the UI of your app, right? It won't take them outside of your app. It'll load it right there. They can go through the flow of taking that survey, and when it's done, it'll return them back to your app. And then you can use the event handlers and callback handlers to basically decide what to do once it returns control to your app. So that's native surveys. Survey wall is really simple. It's just get instance.showSurveys. So once you've initialized everything, you can just fire off show surveys, maybe on the click of a button, depending on how your app is set up and the user experience. So that's the difference between survey wall and native surveys. There's some more details on demographic data that you can pass in, but again, it's not required. We would actually recommend probably not doing that and letting our system handle all of it. Here's the detail section on callbacks. We would recommend not checking for rewards in app. There are some scenarios for apps that don't have a server, and we can't send those server-to-server callbacks to a system without a server, so you can process rewards within the app using our SDK. This details that process. I would say consult with us if that is your scenario, and we can help guide you through that process. And here's the section on customizing the UI in detail. Detail on supported country language lists. So these are the countries and languages that we currently support. And we do have an additional feature where you can check to see if surveys are available. So let's say you didn't really want to show a button for inBrain surveys if no surveys are available for that user. Well, you can use this as a check and ask, are surveys available for a particular user? Now do note you need to initialize using the init call up here. Or set inBrain. It is our initializer, so you'll want to set these client ID and secret and the user ID first, and then you can check to see if surveys are available. So this is the process and flow of getting things set up for all of our SDKs. There is some differences and nuances, iOS versus Android, but for the most part, it's pretty much the same. So that should walk you through the process. If you're interested in seeing this implemented in a full app, we have a demo app, our SDK Android example project, which is a public repository, and you can see that implemented here. If you go into app main activity, you'll see where you can plug in your client ID, your secret, the placement ID is null, and then that unique user ID. And you'll see everything we referenced in our documentation is kind of built out here in this demo app. You can even pull down this repository and run it in Android Studio with your own client IDs and secrets and user IDs and actually run this. We have native surveys and the survey wall implemented in here. You'll see here's our initialization call, and then we add some callbacks and event listeners, and then we're checking if surveys are available. This right here fires up our survey wall. And let's see, we have one that does native surveys, fetches native surveys. Here's what shows a native survey, but it's somewhere in here. So anyway, you can take a look at that. There's a call. Now that I'm looking for it, I kind of want to find it. Right here. Get native surveys. So this sets when it gets a list of surveys for the user and sets that in native surveys. And then when the user clicks on it, it loads up show native surveys. I'm sorry, not right there. Show native surveys and passes in the survey ID and opens up that experience for that particular survey. Hopefully this wasn't too long-winded. Hope to be concise and just walk you through the process of getting everything set up in the publisher dashboard, setting up your server-to-server callbacks, and just walking you through some of the documentation. Let us know if you got any questions.